All right, good morning, everyone. If this is your first time here today, this is our PatternFly demo. I'll be posting this video on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sending it out to our PatternFly list. I went ahead and put the agenda in the chat. And first up, we have Matt, an interaction design with Progressive Wizard.
Hi, everyone. So I've been working on a conceptual design for a wizard, and the objective here was to come up with a universal wizard design that could support either a traditional sort of simple wizard with a fixed number of steps, or could support other use cases where we have guided flows where the exact steps are not known up front, but are determined as the user moves through the workflow. So let me share my screen out, and there's an InVision prototype that I can walk through. This is also linked to the agenda. So so I decided to, rather than have the steps of the wizard displayed across the top as we've done previously for PatternFly 3 and for an earlier iteration of this for PatternFly 4, to put the steps in the left-hand sidebar. So that gives us a couple of advantages. It allows us to, I think, more seamlessly add and remove steps from the sidebar, and it also gets around some of the responsive implementation issues that we had with the horizontal steps bar. So in the simple case, this is the simple basic wizard you all know and love. You can kind of click through this and click through the steps by selecting the next or back buttons. In the progressive wizard use case, so here's an example where I come in, I hit the first step, which is get started, and it's asking me a question, what do you want to do? In this case, I've just created a sample flow where I can choose between creating a new thing or updating an existing thing. If I say create new, and click next, now it exposes the second step, which is asking me to choose between options for creation. So I can either do a quick create or a custom create. If I stay on quick create and click next, now I can expose the remaining steps in the flow, because based on those first two decisions, I know what the course of action here is, and continue to click through this wizard. We also, one of the other advantages of using this left-hand steps navigation is it'll allow us more easily to expose sub-steps. So if you did want to have a primary step and then sub-steps underneath that, we could hierarchically show those separate steps. And if I go back, I can create, if I change my choice here to custom create, we'll see it changes the steps that are displayed on the left-hand side. So we could really apply any logic to this and apply and expose steps based on decisions that the user made in prior steps. The last thing I would show here is what this would look like on a mobile device. So on mobile, we decided that we would hide the steps bar entirely and just show the step that you're on. So in this case, I'm seeing step 3 of 5. In reality, the feeling is that these more complex flows probably, well, they shouldn't break on mobile. They're not flows that are likely to work that well on mobile anyway. So if people are using or expecting to use a mobile, a good practice would really be to keep the wizard simple, do only a few steps. So this approach, I think, would work pretty well. Anyways, any questions folks have on that? Okay, if not, we can move on.
Great, thanks, Matt. And Stacy on content standards progress.
Hey guys, let me share my screen. So I submitted a PR for our content standards, and there's a few accessibility things that we need to add, but essentially I'm splitting the content standards into 3 sections. So we'll have a section for terminology, grammar, and mechanics, so just kind of creating, we have this currently in PatternFly 4, but just kind of expanding on this common terminology that's being used, like for button labels and things, so you don't really have to think about it. You can just come here and take a look at these usage standards and quickly identify like what's the right term for me to use in this situation. And then a lot of this stuff comes and is pulled over from PatternFly 3. So that's all staying the same outside of capitalization standards, which are changing to sentence style caps for all text elements except for column headers and product names. And then, yeah, all this other stuff I think is pretty much the same from PatternFly 3. And then we're also adding this, which I think you've all seen already, but kind of writing for user experience general principles. And then also I've added a section for voice and tone, which helps us align with Red Hat's brand standards with a UX spin. And this section includes a lot of guidelines along with strategies to try and also examples. And this is a lot of kind of in-depth grammar and like just better ways to kind of format and organize your information so that it's more useful and more concise. So yeah, hopefully this is helpful. And then we'll have a writing for all audiences section inside the voice and tone, which talks about internationalization and translation and also accessibility. So that's progress on that.
Great, thank you, Stacy. Any questions? All right. So Gina's going to be presenting a couple of wireframes and flows for our website. So as a reminder, we're folding in website issues into this sprint. So I'll hand it off to Gina.
Thanks, Rachel. Just to tell everybody before I show these, the visual design isn't confirmed because we're having a visual designer on our team. So what I have is basically just based off of our first set of wireframes that we made. But I will share now. Okay. So this page is for designers to get started. This is how, based off of what Stacy has done so far, which the content might change, but each step with these arrows would link to the specifics, like the design styles page within the website, and so on. And then they get started here, which is jump you down. Yeah, so that's the information we have there. And then the developers side, we have this toggle right now for the site that will allow the user to switch between the HTML and React content. Kind of just like gave a note to users here if they're looking for the React information to switch the toggle. And then basically it has the same layout as the designers. Each of these steps though would be like a jump down menu, so it would jump you down the page. And that's what it looks like here. And then I also was working on the icons page for our styles. And I came up with this layout. I didn't update it with all of our current icons that we're using because there's so many, but this is basically what it would look like. It would take like a tile format, and then if you were to hover over a specific icon, it would bring up a tooltip like this, which also the coloring might change depending on what we come up with. But if you were to click see all details, then it would bring you to a page like this that would be specific to that icon. It would give you the option to still copy and download it, more information on the definition and contextual usage, and then gives just examples of the icon and context, which I just added in there, but I don't really know if we're going to end up going with that or not. But yeah, and that's all.
Hi, Gina. Just one question about that icons page. So if I want to search for, if I have a particular need, like I'm looking for an icon for, I don't know, for removing an object from, how can what's the best way to identify that without hovering over every icon?
Oh, I see. So you're trying to search for an icon without knowing the name of it, but knowing the use of it.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. So I guess because my plan was just to be able to search according to the name of that icon, which is really dependent on like Font Awesome or the PatternFly ones that we have. But I think that is a good question. Maybe we could just like categorize all of them by usage, but that might get confusing as
Yeah,
well.
it's something to think about anyways, because I think that's a common use case for when, I know when designers are asking me for icons, they're very often asking, hey, I've got this use case, what is the icon I should be using?
Yeah, that makes sense. No, that was a good point. I'll take that into consideration next time.
Okay, great. Otherwise, it looks great.
Also, I see a question about mobile in the chat. This is something that we'll be working on a little bit later within our design process. But yes, that's something we will be thinking through, and it's a great question. Any other questions on the site progress?
I just had one comment maybe for regarding the searching that Matt was talking about. It's a similar problem that we have had in the past with components. There might be like multiple names for a component. Header could be used called masthead or header or banner. So one thing that I would just maybe recommend looking into would be to just create like a mapping that associates, the actual element or whatever it may be, an icon, a component, whatever, and then some alternate names for it. That's served well in the past, and that way, because if you try to categorize it, obviously not everything fits into a sensible category, but you can add as many tags as you want. So
Yep.
maybe that's an area worth kind of looking into. And then the search, of course, would search over all of those tags, not just the names. Yeah.
Yep. That's definitely something we've talked about a lot from a website perspective. I'm, being able to tag content and search on those tags. So.
Yeah, and that's something we're going to be working on in the future is that search experience. So once we go through that exercise, we can definitely, and like Matt was saying, it's something we've talked about before, map those elements with alternate names. I think masthead versus header is the perfect example. And there are plenty of those, and we'll definitely do that. All right. And Gina is busy this sprint. She's going to kick us off with visuals as well.
Okay. I think the first one is, the filter demo. So I'll share again. Okay. So I worked on a bunch of different filters for the toolbar, basically. And the main idea was that the toolbar is going to be very flexible and can incorporate all of these different types of filters. So just examples of the ones that we're going to have is the drop down select here. And then with filter chips that would come underneath the toolbar. And then we have the multi-select drop down as well. And we added, oh, I guess this is important. We added a badge here that would represent the amount of like stopped items within those filtered items that you have. So there would be 7 out of the 17 items here, sorry. So 7 out of 17 are stopped, and then that's just how we would represent it there. Just so that you don't have to like click on it, and it gives you an easy, it's just easily detectable by doing that. And then here would be an example of a possible calendar date range picker, which actually hasn't been designed yet, so I kind of just did an example there. And then this next one is a checkbox that is separated per category, and then you can multi-select from there. The same type of badges within filter chips within categories shows up there as well. And then here's just the mobile filter. And then I just have one example of it in context, so this is kind of how it would look there. If anybody has any questions, feel free to stop me, but I also have the data table and data list to show. So for data table examples, we have the compact data table to look like that. Then the expandable data table. Then data table with checkboxes, and that's just like the normal size. The sortable data table, which I also worked on, which I'll show you at the end kind of how it would work with interactions. And this is the compound expandable data table, which I also have an example of here. So the sortable data table is pretty much the only one that has like the different interactions. The idea was that if a category is sortable or a column header is sortable, then when you hover over it, this line would appear. And then if you were to click on it, then it would appear like this. A second click would then switch the way of the sort. And if another column header is sortable, then that same gray line would appear underneath it, and you could switch which column you're sorting by. And then the data list is just a bunch of different examples. So the main point of this was to differentiate a data table from a data list, which we actually had a hard time with at first, but I think just giving a different example really makes it clear. So these don't have to be in specific columns. They just have to be left, the content within each row has to be left aligned and right aligned. And then the heights of each row can change. And I tried to represent that by doing this example. And then just an expandable data list would look something like this. And yeah, that's all I got. Does anyone have any questions?
Is there a reason we didn't use a like a sort icon on the data table to indicate that columns are sortable? I think you mentioned you have to like interact with it first to know that it's sortable.
Yeah. Is there a reason? No. I know that that's the one that's currently implemented. So no, there's not really a reason. I just chose to have it so that you would have to hover over it first. Do you think that there should be a sortable icon there?
Yeah, well, I can see it being helpful. Not all the columns are always sortable, or you can be sortable. So if you have like a quick way to know which columns can be sorted without having to interact with everyone, that could be seen as helpful.
I also think that having an icon there would probably help accessibility wise, because I didn't even check if this would pass that. So I think that's probably a good idea. But thank you for that.
Also, just one quick comment. In this example you show here, it looks like the checkbox and the repositories column header are on the same column, but the way it's implemented now is those are separate columns.
Sorry, what do you mean? These are, so you mean the line makes it seem like they're the same column?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
So I think that the way you highlight it would exclude the checkbox and just be around the repositories.
Okay.
That's a good catch, yeah.
The item count and pagination controls, they feel like they're taking up a lot of real estate. I mean, I know you had to move them to the bottom for the column view, and for the list view, it takes up. You've got room for a couple filters, and then you're totally out of room. Are we exploring any way to kind of minimalize how much space that takes up?
What view are you specifically talking about?
Well, it's in both the data table and in the list view, but like the 1 to 5 of 10 items, and then you've got
Here.
4 different arrows, and then the 1 of 2 pages. Actually, it's at top and bottom in this view.
Yeah. We did talk about that a bit, and I think the feeling was, and Gina, feel free to chime in here. I think, if you start to lose space there, you might compress all the actions into a kebab.
Yeah, I think that's what we talked about, and I can go to the toolbar here as well.
Yeah,
so I totally understand that point, and I think originally we were maybe thinking of taking away the double right and double left, but if you do, you just wouldn't suffice, like you wouldn't cover all of the use cases for that. So in the end, we just decided that you could put actions into one kebab, but I see the point that you're making. I guess there was really just no other way of doing that unless we wanted to make it 2 lines for that toolbar, and then it would just leave less room for the content that you want in that table, which I thought would be worse if we did that.
Right. The trade-off was we wanted to try to see if we could get the toolbar into one line, whereas in PatternFly 3 we're taking up two lines for the toolbars by default, and
I definitely like it better than 3. I was just wondering how much further we can push it.
yeah.
I also have a question around the paging and I'm assuming and hoping that most of our products are trying to stay away from paging as much as possible going forward. So I think it's a great exercise to be making sure that we continue to keep that component in all these images here, but I'm also assuming that paging is optional from a PatternFly perspective. But
Yes, absolutely.
It is.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right, great.
Yeah, so
Thanks.
that's another good point is, in a lot of cases, we wouldn't have paging there. So we were trying to make this as flexible as possible because what I think we realized in terms of looking at product examples and talking to people working on product, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for the toolbar. I think different products have different requirements in terms of what they need in the toolbar. So when Gina was working on this, I asked her to, I think that third mock-up down sort of shows like almost the worst case, what would this look like with like everything you could possibly have, a bulk selector, sort control, actions, pagination. But hopefully in most cases, we would not need to have all of those things together.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it looks good.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Gina. And Michael with login form updates.
Rachel, I just wanted to add one thing on real quick that Gina was working on. I just want to say one thing, Gina. Everything looks amazing. You did a great job. But also, this morning we were working on the navigation So Gina made some corrections to the navigation, and she'll be uploading that today. So if anybody has the sketch file, please go back, and you want to use navigation, please go back and get the latest. Probably will be available at the end of today. That's all.
Yeah, I updated it already, so it's there.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. All right, Michael.
Cool. So there's been a few open issues around the login form. And the kind of, I guess, prompts for those range from everything from accessibility to just kind of general design concerns. And so I think we've been doing a pretty good job of kind of solving those. And we're not totally done yet. There's still a few kind of open-ended things that we need to figure out, but I think we're at a good point where we're ready to share some progress with that. And I want to give a special thanks to Josh Nillens, because he's been working on the documentation for the login page, but he's also been very instrumental in the design process and working with me to kind of solve a lot of these problems. So thanks, Josh. So I want to start with the before and do a little before and after. So you can see the before is, it's pretty nice. This actually is a really old one. It's got the old button style, the pill button style. But there were some concerns that we needed to change. One thing, the language selector at the top is an old drop-down style, and we need to change that to the new drop-down style. And then also, there was an accessibility concern with the keep me signed in for 30 days checkbox, where if you were using this with a screen reader, by default, it would read that, or the order that would be read would come after the sign in button, which is pretty odd and not very expected for screen reader users. So here's where we're at now with the new layout. And like I said, it's still in progress, but this is a pretty solid representation of, I think, where it might end up. So you can see a couple big changes. The first one is that we moved the language selector to the top right, just like it is in PatternFly 3. And this is because of that adding that new drop-down style. We didn't think it felt very well, or it felt very good from a visual perspective underneath the login header. And it also, we wanted to some vertical space because it did take up a lot of vertical space and made this very tall for having just that on the line. And then you can see also we moved the keep me signed in for 30 days right under the password field, and this is kind of the expected spot for it. So it'll be, it's a much more logical order for the screen reader to read things in, where right after your input fields, you've got keep me signed in for 30 days. Another big change we made is making the login button full width. And this was really mostly a visual change, but also somewhat functional. Basically, when we moved that keep me signed in checkbox up above the password, or sorry, below the password field, it just kind of left the login button there on the left aligned. And we kind of ran into this visual issue where you can see we've got this kind of justified layout going on, where the top part, the header is left aligned, but we've got the right aligned language selector, and then the input fields are full width. And it started to feel like it was very confused whether or not I wanted to be a full width justified layout or a left aligned layout. And we found that the full width layout, kind of going more in the direction of the full width layout, felt a lot better overall. So kind of both a functional or a visual thing, and then also a functional thing because at smaller breakpoints, so at the mobile breakpoint, we actually have that button take up full width anyways. And this is pretty much the max width of the panel that you would ever see. So we thought it worked pretty well, and it does look a lot better than the alternative of the shorter length button. And then you can see we've also got another big change was with the social icons. So if I go back here, you can see on the bottom, we had the icons, which are not there. They're just placeholder boxes, but then the label as well. And that ended up taking up a lot of room. I remember when I was making this, I specifically chose options that had shorter names because I was kind of cheating. But by using just the logos, we're able to save a ton of room, and you're able to fit a substantial amount more in that area. And then we also created this bottom section, the light gray area with the need an account sign up and the forgot username or password button. We just thought that was a nice kind of way to visually separate those two areas. So if we didn't have that background, it felt kind of messy with the social login options above. So like I said, this is still not quite all the way there. We're still kind of exploring different options, like how other ways we can lay out those social login options, for example, to save some more vertical room. Yeah, so that's pretty much the kind of full feature login form. And then I wanted to take you guys through a flow we've been working on. A part of this work was kind of covering more use cases that we initially left out. And so the multi-factor login flow was one that we have been working on that I wanted to kind of go through and show you where we're at with that. So multi-factor login, basically you kind of go step by step, and there's multiple options for the password or the kind of verification, which you'll see. So we start out with kind of all the changes we made already with the new layout. And you start out with the username, and the user enters their username and hits next, and retrieves their avatar and recognizes the account. And after they hit next, the password field comes up below. And another thing that happens is you get the option to switch user, which essentially just takes you back a step and reactivates that username field. And then basically there's just a few different options for instead of the password, you can use your Google Authenticator app for two-factor authentication. And you can see the way that we treated that is we basically used the input field label and just added whatever text we need to add there in place of the label above the input field to convey that information. So here's how it would look for a verification two-factor sent with the phone number, if that's your preferred method. And then an 8-digit backup code. And you can see just changing that label out for the text that we need, even if it needs to wrap, still works pretty well. And I think is a simple way to accomplish that. And that's pretty much it for multi-factor login. It's pretty simple flow. So last thing we want to look at was how a server error or any kind of error really with the login would look. So we were initially looking at a full width login, but the more kind of research we did on what other people were doing, we found that they use this kind of just form width login. So we went with that because we thought that looked a little bit cleaner and nicer. And if there is a lot more text, we figured it can wrap. So yeah, I guess where we're at now, we're still trying to figure out how to cut down some of that vertical space because, as you can see, it's pretty tall here. We definitely don't want the user to have to scroll, at least on a desktop breakpoint or viewport size. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few comments. Yeah, right there. This is way better than the before. This after is much better. The only thing I see that might be a problem is with social. I know you're still tweaking that, but to give you a few other things to think about, in Keycloak at least, we don't have any limit on the number of social logins you might have. So that could get pretty big, that list there. The other is, I'm a little concerned about the availability of the icons.
Yep, that's a great point. So we actually recently decided, which is not reflected here, but we recently decided to probably go with the Font Awesome 5 versions of these icons because I think there's some concern around shipping those logo icons by default, I guess. So hopefully, yeah, I think that's a great question that we still need to figure out because if there's not a Font Awesome 5 icon for the logo, what do we do?
Right. I
Yeah.
assume here you're planning that if you hover over the icon, it'll tell you what that is. Am I
Right.
right?
Tooltip.
So I
Yes.
guess, yeah, you could have some, some S icon or something that stands for social if you don't have the right icon, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
not great
maybe.
either.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the solution is right now, but definitely
Right.
something to think about.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. And then with the first comment about we actually used to have this more button, and that's something that I didn't include in this yet. More so just to push the point that you could fit a lot more stuff in here. But
Yeah.
I think we would still retain that functionality. And what happens when you click that button is this whole panel gets taken over, the whole view gets taken over by a list view of all of the options, which would be able to
Right.
contain, however many you need. So I think we could
Yeah.
retain that.
Okay, that's good.
hmm
That's good.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you.
I had a question, Michael. This looks really good. I definitely like the direction it's going. I'm wondering with the top part where it says log into your account and then the language selector, have you tested this to see what it's going to look like on mobile, like on a smaller screen where that space is going to be a lot possibly tighter, or tried to see
Yeah.
what like with like a longer string of text?
I think so. The way that I was envisioning that, I guess, I haven't mocked up to see how it would actually look, but I was thinking that I would just stack probably either the language selector would either go above or below the header,
Yeah.
because we would need to do, that's a valid concern.
Yeah, I know that previously when you were working on this, this was something that was always kind of like the challenge with that language selector is putting it somewhere where it's not going to cause issues with the elements around it. But
Yeah. In the same vein, translations, languages that take up a lot more room, that's pretty much the same problem. So that's another thing we're still kind of considering and working through.
you could reduce the spacers too on mobile if you want to save some space. I don't know with that. I don't.
Yeah, I think from an older login mockup, I think that's actually what we do is we do reduce the padding spacers to give some more room. So
Yeah, cool.
definitely want to keep doing that.
All right.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone.
Hey, Michael, I just had one thing. It's just a really small thing, but I wasn't sure if this was an oversight or it was intentional, but I noticed that here you're using login, but in the multi-factor login case, you're using sign in. So.
Yep. So that was an oversight. We did, I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we decided to go with sign in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with either. I think.
No, we're gonna do login.
Stacy might
We're
have
keeping it the same.
more.
Stacy.
I know.
Okay, login. Cool.
It was a conversation that we had, and we went back to login.
Yeah.
We went back to login.
Okay.
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 Login for
I
everything.
can update that anywhere I still have sign in. So thanks for the heads up. Sorry about that.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool.
One small question. I wonder, maybe I missed this part, but how do you interact with errors, like server error?
So yeah, there's kind of two versions, and one of them I didn't show, but this we do have interaction patterns for these inline alert styles. So there would be a text button here, or some kind of if this needed to wrap, there would be a button or a text link, I should say, to act on that or to dismiss it, an X button. But also we've got in the event, you've got the typical invalid username or invalid password. Those are handled with input field error styling. So that's how that would, I think those are the only ones that we would really show. It's like for input fields.
Thank you. Because in PF3, there were some, users didn't really like the jumping errors underneath
Okay.
the input.
Okay. Yeah. We'll be sure to try to do the best we can to make sure that they're visible and noticeable. I was hoping you can see here the idea is that the error would actually push down the form, the whole form, which is something we're still kind of debating. But that might help in terms of visibility. At least that's, I guess, my perspective. But that's still open as well. If we want to do that.
Awesome. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you. All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Michael. And Michael Coker in CSS.
Hey, share my screen. Okay, let's see. The first one was, this is still a work in progress, removing our utility classes that are just helper classes you can use in CSS for layout changes. This hasn't been merged yet, but that's basically just pulling our utility classes because of the size out of the main patternfly.css file, since they're not essential or used anywhere by default. Pulling that out and moving it to a file similar to Patternfly 3, where we have patternfly-addons.css that you can add those on if you choose to. And part of that change involved removing any utility classes that we actually are using in the system by default, and the only one that we had remaining were the screen reader classes that we use to hide elements from the desktop page and only make them visible, so to speak, in a text voiceover or voice reading application. And so we moved the PFU SR only class. Well, actually, that still exists as a utility, but the class that we're using in Patternfly by default in our components without the use of utility classes is just moved to screen reader. And then the next issue was changing our page layout to a component. Since we style the page layout very specifically, it's only got a single use, and we style it just like we do other components. We just moved this to a component, and it was just a naming change only. PFL page would become PFC page, and no other additional changes to that. And then the last issue was with the empty state component. Previously, it only allowed for a primary action and a single secondary action, and we made updates to where you can now have multiple secondary actions. Those retain the style of the PFM link style button, and they're just grouped together underneath the primary action like this. And that's it.
Great, thank you, Michael. And Andy with Alert Group.
All right. So this is based on issue 654, just a toast notification layout, basically, where you have toast in the top right corner. At one point, we had this sort of collapse notification that would say, like, you have two more on red and having an action button there. This is being reworked, so that's not included inside this PR. It's mostly just about laying them out in the top right corner. So here's the alert group component 1136, and there are kind of two parts to it. The first is just a basic inline alert group where it's not in the top right corner, but can be included inside of content. And what this does is that if you have multiple alerts that should be right next to each other, it adds a bit of spacing between them for consistency. And then using a modifier, PFM toast, you can turn that one alert group into a toast alert group, and that lays it out as so in the top right corner. Same padding between them with close buttons. And yeah, that is that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy. And Matt Carlton with About Modal Updates and nav updates.
Hey. So I'm going to share first here the about modal. So there was some changes to this. Most of the work that I'm sharing is coming through the work that we've been doing on the OpenShift side. So as OpenShift starts to pull in PatternFly 4, we're making changes to the designs as we see it kind of like live in action and just making tweaks. So the first one I want to talk about was the about modal. You can't really tell here, but once it was in the context of an actual screen and seeing a background and stuff, we realized that we could make some changes to the box shadow here and the background color just to make it a little nicer to look at. And we also removed the branding that was here because it was just being a bit problematic. So there's just this one opportunity now for a logo. That's pretty much it for the about modal. And then another real quick one was for vertical nav. I don't remember how much of this stuff I've demoed in the past, but we've been making lots of little changes to the navigation system as far as spacing, just to allow for more items to fit on smaller screens, so there's not the issue of scrolling. So you can see that. That there is a lot of this is already merged. So if you go to PF Next and look at the navigation, you're going to see that. What I'm showing you here isn't merged yet, but it's basically for subnav items. We have this opportunity to add a separator, which is currently in OpenShift, but we're going to pull it into PatternFly, so it's available through PatternFly now as well. And other than that, just some minor spacing changes and some alignment issues that we've fixed and just kind of polished things a little bit. That is pretty much it.
Great, thank you, Matt. And James.
Hey, so I've been doing a little bit of work in refactoring the buttons and the font awesome icons for PatternFly. So I'm going to start and share my screen real quick. Everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So Michael Coker has actually done a little bit of work ahead by updating the button icons and the button icon HPS handlebar file. And essentially what we're doing is that we're reducing the call for each and every one of these buttons that we have for PatternFly. So the initial file itself was a bunch of button has call if else conditions. This file can get pretty heavy, so what we're essentially doing is we're reducing it to a single call for any icons, and then there's a if statement. If the user has a button icon of a certain type, it will look within the assets font awesome underscore icons SCSS file. So this is are all the icons that we currently use. So here's an example that we have changed for the toolbar symbol example. So initially it would have been but as list icon equals true. So we're reducing that and giving the consumer the option to actually just add button icon type list. Doing this allows you to ping questions what icon, and it goes and sifts through this file and it finds the list. So it reduces the call. And we still get the same icons. Yeah, just a refactoring of the file itself. That's it for me. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks, James. And Joachim on the React side with tooltip and website work.
Yep, just a second. Share screen. Okay, can you see my browser?
Yes, we can.
All right. So first up for PatternFly 4, we added the tooltip. So as you'd expect, if you hover over you get the tooltip and you can control the direction that it opens up in. For example, down here, you can specify that you want to have it open up to the bottom, hover over. And then not just hovering over, but you can also focus it using the tab key. So right now I've got this focused up here. If I hit the tab key, you can see that the tooltip pops up, open. And if you hit the escape key, it would exit it. And the usage is pretty straightforward. Whatever you want to apply a tooltip on, in this case, the span, you just surround it with this tooltip component, and you just give it an optional position and the content of the tooltip. And down here, you can see the props. Again, as you'd expect, position, and the only really required things are some kind of component that you wrap and the content of the tooltip. That's it for the tooltip. Next up, an early look at the website work that got rebooted to pull in both the documentation for React and Core for PatternFly 4. I started working on that again, and one thing that got dusted off were the scripts to pull in those libraries. So you can see here we're pulling in Core, and we're starting to pull in various React libraries. And it's also been built from the ground up now using Gatsby 2. So you can see in our dependencies, we've got Gatsby 2 in here. And also one big change to the previous iteration is that it's pulling in PatternFly 4 components. So I've got a running example here. So we've got the PatternFly page layout and navigation. And for the first iteration, we were pulling in Core and React, and you can see when you go to the documentation tab that, nav item, that it's right now it's the same as what we have in the React workspace. So soon you'll be able to use the switcher up here to switch to Core, and also the next step will be to have this publicly hosted. That should happen sometime this week. That's it so far. Any questions?
I have one question, one thing I just thought of. So it's really nice to have the switchers, going between Core and React. One thing I'm just curious if we're planning on doing anything for is like if you go the React route, you can go with either JavaScript or TypeScript. Are we going to have like a similar type of control that would allow people to view JavaScript versus TypeScript snippets in like examples, or do you think we're eventually just going towards TypeScript and all the examples being, will be one or the other? Any idea on that?
That's a good question. I don't think we've really thought about that yet. Our library is going to be built using TypeScript going forward, but the examples, we probably still want to maybe have versions of JavaScript and TypeScript. So that's a good question. Something to think about. I'm not sure yet.
Okay, thanks.
I took a quick note. Thank you, Michael, for bringing that up. We'll definitely talk about that. And Tatani with tabs. And James, I'm going to ask you to mute because I think we're hearing your keyboard.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I worked on tabs. So here we have an example of just a basic tab, simple tab. So when you click on the tab, the content switches. And then we have tabs with scrolling. So if the tab list is bigger than the viewable area, we'll have scroll buttons. So because it's content is scrolled up to the right side, we have a right scroll button here. And then if I scroll, we'll get a left scroll button. when there's content off to the left. And this modifier indicates that the selected tab is off the screen to the left. So it means the buttons to scroll as well. Okay. And then we have an example here of a secondary tab group within a tab. So this first tab has secondary tab group in here. And then there's a prop that you can set to have the tabs fill up the whole viewable space. That's what this example is. That's pretty much it for tabs.
Great, thank you, Tatani. And Don with Application Launcher. And Don, we don't hear your audio quite yet, but we see your screen.
How about
We're
Can you hear
not
me now?
hearing any. Yes, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I just do voiceover for Don, and I know what he's going to say. Don would love that.
What about now? Is it working now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
See,
Well,
the
this thing's
threat
plugged
made
in.
it start working. There we
I
go.
know. I don't even know what the threat was, but all right, let me share my screen and see if that works. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it. We've
Okay,
got it now.
so the application launcher. So we created a new component called the application launcher. Similar to a dropdown where it's the list of items that you can select when you click on it. We have two examples. We have one that has a tooltip and one that doesn't have the tooltip. If you're coming from PF3, there's going to be a slight change in the code where you do the tooltip. It's like Joachim said today that you're going to wrap the application launcher in the tooltip. That'll be the slight difference that you got in this implementation for PF4. We have list of all the props down here. Most of it's the same as you would see in PF3, but currently we don't support grids, so you don't have that option here. So that prop isn't available yet. If we add it down the line, then it'll become available over here. That's pretty much it for the application launcher. Is there any questions?
Great, thank you so much, Don. And Ian with TypeScript Generator. Ian? Oh, there we are. Hi.
All right. So as part of the ongoing effort to switch over to using TypeScript, I started working on adding TypeScript support for the component generators in the React app or the React library. So if you can see my command line here, you can, as before, you can still run yarn generate and select a PatternFly 4 component. and I'm going to create a TypeScript component. And in the future, we may add support for creating a class type component as well as a stateless functional component. But for now, I've just added the support for the stateless functional component, and we have a new TypeScript component with the proper syntax and extensions for TypeScript. And there's an example of how to use the TypeScript interface instead of prop types. So this will be really helpful when as a team we decide to move over to TypeScript, or I guess we already have decided, but when TypeScript in general will just cut down a lot of errors we'll see before even pushing up to GitHub. So that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Great, thank you, Ian. All right, well, that brings us to the end of today's demo. Great demo, everyone. Thank you for those of you who presented and volunteered, and thank you to those from the community who attended. We hope to see you next time. I'll be sending this out to our YouTube channel and our mailing list as well. And as always, we'd love to hear from you and hear out your questions you may have for PatternFly. Everyone, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks.
Bye.